When you think of Hollywood villains, one name always rises to the top: Jack Elam. With his crooked smile, wild stare, and menacing presence, he became the man audiences loved to fear. For decades, directors cast him as the outlaw, the killer, the man with hate burning in his eyes. But here's the question that still lingers in the minds of fans and film historians alike. Was Jack Elam's on-screen hatred just brilliant acting? Or was it a reflection of something darker inside him? Rumors spread across Hollywood that Jack had enemies he could barely stand to work with. Some whispered about clashes on set, others hinted at personal grudges that followed him throughout his career. And yet behind the scenes, colleagues described him as one of the funniest, most easygoing men in the business. So, which was true? Did Jack Elam truly despise someone more than anyone else? Or was the hatred we saw nothing more than a mask, carefully crafted for the cameras? Tonight we dive deep into the mystery of Jack Elam. From his tragic childhood accident that left him with his signature stare, to the legendary roles that cemented his place in Hollywood, to the stories that may reveal the truth about who, if anyone, Jack Elam truly hated. This is not just the story of a man. It is the story of how Hollywood can blur the line between reality and performance, and how one actor's hatred became his greatest legacy. Long before, Jack Elam became Hollywood's most recognizable villain. He was just a boy growing up in Miami, Arizona, a mining town where life was hard, rough, and often unforgiving. Born on November 13, 1920, Jack Elam knew struggle from the very start. His mother died when he was still young, leaving him and his siblings in the care of their father, a bookkeeper. Life without a mother hardened him early, and that sense of loss became one of the first shadows that followed him throughout his life. But it was a single childhood accident that would forever shape both his appearance and his destiny. At the age of 12, during a Boy Scout fight, another boy accidentally stabbed Jack in the left eye with a pencil. The injury left him blind in that eye, giving him the unmistakable wandering eye that later became his trademark. To most people, it might have seemed like a curse, a disfigurement that could only limit his opportunities. For Jack, however, it became the key that unlocked his career in Hollywood. Before acting, Elam led a remarkably different life. He worked as a bookkeeper and even an auditor for the IRS. For years, he was far removed from the glamour of Hollywood, crunching numbers behind a desk. But his distinctive face and sharp wit eventually drew him into the world of acting, first as an accountant for producers and later as an actor himself. When he did make the leap, casting directors immediately saw his potential. In an era where villains needed to look menacing, Jack's face was unforgettable. His damaged eye, paired with his tall, lanky frame and crooked smile, gave him an air of menace no makeup could ever replicate. It wasn't long before westerns became his domain. He embodied the kind of outlaw audiences instantly recognized: dangerous, unpredictable, and ruthless. Films like High Noon, 1952, Rawhide, 1951, and countless B-westerns cemented his reputation. He didn't just play villains, he defined them. Hollywood had created an archetype, and Jack Elam became its poster child. Yet behind the scenes, there was no bitterness in Jack about his typecasting. In fact, he leaned into it, often poking fun at the fact that he was always the one holding the gun, robbing the bank, or meeting his end at the hands of the hero. He joked that if he ever lived past the first act of a film, audiences would be shocked. Still, the image of Jack Elam as a man filled with hatred began to grow, not because of who he was in real life, but because of how perfectly he portrayed hate on the screen. The sneer, the glare, the sudden bursts of violence, it all felt real, too real. Audiences began to wonder, could a man play hatred that convincingly without carrying some of it in his heart? What they didn't realize was that Jack Elam was already laying the foundation for one of Hollywood's greatest contradictions. A man feared as the ultimate villain on screen, yet often beloved and admired by his peers behind the camera. The making of a villain, as it turned out, wasn't born from bitterness or grudges. It was born from circumstance, tragedy, and talent. And it was only the beginning of Jack Elam's complicated story. When Jack Elam stepped into Hollywood, he didn't just join the industry. He carved out a place that only he could fill. At a time when Westerns dominated American cinema, producers were constantly searching for actors who could embody the menacing outlaws, ruthless bandits, and unpredictable killers who stood in the way of the hero. With his crooked smile, rough-edged charm, and that unmistakable wandering eye, Jack Elam was not just another actor. He was a presence audiences couldn't forget. By the early 1950s, Elam was everywhere. He appeared in films like Rawhide alongside Tyrone Power, Vera Cruz with Burt Lancaster, and the Oscar-winning High Noon with Gary Cooper. Time and again, he was the villain who met his end in a hail of gunfire or a showdown on dusty main streets. His roles may have been short, but his impact was lasting. Audiences remembered his face, his sneer, and his ability to bring menace to life. But as Elam's fame grew, so did the myth of his hatred. He was so convincing as a villain that people began to assume the hatred he displayed on screen had to come from somewhere real. The glare he gave to John Wayne, the sneer he shot at Clint Eastwood, the way his characters seemed to radiate contempt. It was too powerful to simply dismiss as acting. Fans whispered, "Who did Jack Elam really hate?" The truth was both simpler and more fascinating. Elam was a consummate professional who studied the craft of villainy with precision. He knew how to use his eye to unsettle people, how to twist his smile at just the right moment, how to draw audiences into the illusion of hatred. He once said that villains of his era didn't need complex backstories. They were evil because they were evil. And Jack made that simplicity terrifyingly real. Yet not all of his roles were pure menace. By the 1960s and 1970s, as Westerns began to evolve, Elam showed a new side of himself: comedy. Films like Support Your Local Sheriff and Support Your Local Gunfighter revealed that he could twist the same characteristics that made him scary into something hilarious. His crooked eye became the punchline, his sneer a comedic beat, his gruff voice a source of unexpected charm. This transformation added another layer to the myth. If Elam could play both menace and humor with equal mastery, then what was the real man like? Co-stars consistently described him as warm, funny, and incredibly sharp. Far from a hateful figure, Jack Elam became known on set as someone who lightened the mood and kept spirits high. He loved telling jokes, poking fun at his own appearance, and reminding people that his so-called hatred was nothing more than performance. Still, the audience clung to the image of Jack Elam as the man who radiated pure contempt. His villains didn't just fight heroes, they seemed to despise them. And because he played these roles so often, people assumed he must have felt the same way in real life. But that was the paradox of Jack Elam. He was Hollywood's favorite villain, a man whose very face became shorthand for evil. Yet, away from the cameras, there was no hatred, no darkness, only a man who had mastered the art of making hatred look real. And as his career grew, so too did the mystery. If Jack Elam didn't hate his co-stars, his directors, or his audiences, then who, if anyone, did he truly hate more than anyone else? The answer to that question would shape the rumors, the whispers, and the legends that followed him for decades. By the time Jack Elam had cemented his reputation as one of Hollywood's most memorable villains, the whispers had already begun. Audiences were convinced no man could play hatred so vividly without harboring some of it deep inside. His characters sneered at lawmen, betrayed partners, and gunned down innocents with such conviction that fans often blurred the line between the actor and the roles he played. So the question spread through Hollywood gossip: who did Jack Elam truly hate? Some pointed to clashes with directors. Elam was a professional, but he didn't appreciate being pigeonholed or ordered around unnecessarily. If he felt a director wasn't respecting the craft, he had no problem speaking his mind. In an industry built on egos, that could easily spark tensions. Yet, while some remembered heated words on set, no one ever accused Elam of carrying grudges beyond the day's work. Others speculated that Elam had conflicts with fellow actors. After all, he often worked alongside the biggest stars of his generation: John Wayne, Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas. Surely there must have been resentment, jealousy, or outright hatred. And yet when colleagues described him, the story was strikingly different. They remembered him as witty, sharp, and even kind. He loved telling jokes between takes and poking fun at his villainous image. In fact, many leading men respected him for the very quality that audiences mistook as real hatred, his ability to elevate every scene he touched. But Hollywood thrives on myths, and Elam's menacing aura was too tempting to ignore. Fans spun stories of rivalries and grudges that never existed. The legend grew that somewhere behind those glaring eyes was a man who despised someone more than anyone else, perhaps a rival actor, a difficult director, or a studio executive. The reality, however, was much simpler. Jack Elam did not live his life fueled by hatred. He played hatred, embodied it, and mastered it, but he left it on the screen. In interviews, he made light of the assumptions people had about him. He laughed at the idea that he was truly the cold-blooded outlaw he so often portrayed. In truth, his most biting comments were usually directed at Hollywood itself, at the typecasting that locked him into villain roles for years. If there was one thing Elam may have hated, it was not a person, but a system. He bristled at being boxed in, at being reduced to nothing more than his appearance. Though he later embraced the comedic side of his talent, the years of being cast solely as the bad guy wore on him. He once joked that his characters never survived past the second act, and while he said it with humor, there was truth beneath the laughter, and so the myth persisted. Because audiences wanted it to believe that Jack Elam, the man with the dangerous eye and menacing smile, truly hated someone more than anyone else made the fantasy of his villains all the more real. But in the end, when the cameras stopped rolling, the hate disappeared. What remained was a man remembered by his colleagues not for grudges or bitterness, but for humor, professionalism, and a rare ability to make evil look human. The hatred of Jack Elam was never personal. It was performance, and perhaps the greatest illusion he ever gave to the world. As Jack Elam grew older, his career began to shift. The fearsome outlaw, once gunning down sheriffs and rivals in dusty westerns, started to reveal another side of himself, a side that would surprise many of his longtime fans. Elam leaned into comedy. The same crooked eye and menacing grin that had terrified audiences now became tools for laughter. His timing, his delivery, and his natural sense of humor transformed him into an unlikely comedic star. This turn in his career was not just reinvention, it was revelation. For decades, Hollywood had relied on him to embody hate, violence, and menace. Now, audiences saw the man behind the mask. They discovered someone who could laugh at himself, who could play up his own intimidating appearance for laughs rather than fear. In roles like Support Your Local Sheriff, Elam charmed viewers with a performance that balanced menace with hilarity, proving that he was far more versatile than the industry had ever given him credit for. Yet, the myth of his hatred never disappeared. Fans still whispered, still wondered, who did Jack Elam truly despise? It was a question that lingered, even after his passing in 2003, and perhaps that is exactly how legends are made, in the space between truth and imagination. Colleagues who worked with him often dispelled the rumors. They described a man who was loyal to his friends, playful on set, and deeply grateful for the career he had carved out of unlikely circumstances. This was someone who, after losing an eye as a boy, could have turned bitter. Instead, he embraced the very feature that made him different, transforming it into the foundation of a decades-long Hollywood career. If there was any tragedy in Jack Elam's story, it was that he was never fully free of the typecasting that defined him. Even as he demonstrated his comedic brilliance, audiences and producers alike still tied him to the image of the outlaw. But rather than let that limitation break him, Elam leaned into it. He became the best villain in the business. He turned hatred into an art form, perfecting sneers and snarls that others could only imitate. In many ways, this was Jack Elam's greatest contribution to Hollywood. He reminded us that villains are not simply bad men with guns. They are characters who feel real, who embody something unsettling and human. His performances blurred the line between fiction and reality so convincingly that people truly believed he carried those hatreds off-screen. That was the power of his craft. And so, when we ask the question, who did Jack Elam truly hate? The answer may not satisfy the hunger for scandal. He did not despise John Wayne, nor feud with directors, nor carry grudges against fellow actors. The truth is simpler. Jack Elam hated no one more than anyone else. What he hated was limitation, the box Hollywood tried to keep him in. But even then, he used that box to build one of the most iconic careers in American cinema. Today, when we look back on his body of work, we don't just see villains. We see a man who transformed personal tragedy into professional triumph. We see an actor who could terrify and amuse, often in the same breath. And we see the myth of hatred, a myth that, in its own way, made him unforgettable. Jack Elam's legacy is proof that sometimes the greatest performances are not about who we are, but who we allow the world to believe we are.